Hello, everyone! Welcome to my channel, Bachelor Nation News fans. The ballroom lights had dimmed. The last of the cameras had stopped rolling hours ago, but the ghost of the evening still lingered in the air. A quiet hum of what once was, a whisper of emotions left unspoken. Debbie sat alone on the veranda of the Bachelor mansion, the silk folds of her gown spilling like a golden river across the marble floor. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not anymore. Most of the women had already left, their laughter echoing faintly from the driveway as SUVs whisked them away to their next chapters, new beginnings or quiet heartbreaks. But Debbie, she lingered. In the distance, a faint chorus of crickets sang under the California moon, and the scent of jasmine hung in the air, haunting, sweet, and heavy, like the kind of love that once felt eternal but somehow slipped through trembling fingers. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for her glass of champagne, untouched, now lukewarm. She took a deep breath and let her gaze wander across the mansion lawn, remembering all the nights she'd spent there, nights of laughter, tears, and those secret, stolen moments with Mel. Mel. Even thinking his name hurt. She remembered the first night he smiled at her. Not the polite host smile he gave everyone, but the real one, the one that reached his eyes, the one that said, "I see you." She remembered how her heart fluttered in that strange, long-forgotten way, like a teenager rediscovering love after a lifetime of playing it safe. And now, here she was, the camera's gone, the glitter fading, replaying every word, every look, every mistake. The night air brushed against her skin, and with it came the truth she had tried to bury all season. She had fallen for Mel, and somewhere along the way she had lost herself, trying to hold on to a man who was never fully hers. Flashback. Week 4, the turning point. Debbie, Mel's voice was soft, the way a storm is soft before it breaks. You know I care about you. You're one of the most incredible women I've ever met. She had smiled that night, not because she believed him, but because she needed to. The cameras had been on them, and she could feel the producer's eyes burning into her from across the garden. Every word mattered. Every blink was a headline waiting to happen. "I care about you too, Mel," she had replied, her voice trembling just slightly. But then came the pause. That cruel, cinematic pause that would later replay 1,000 times on TikTok, stitched and analyzed by fans with captions like, "Did you see his eyes when she said that?" Mel hadn't looked at her when he said, "But I also need to follow my heart." And just like that, her world had tilted. The air had thickened, the night sky had seemed to close in around her, and she had known, deep down, that his heart might not lead back to her. Now, months later, Debbie watched that same clip in her mind, every frame burned into her memory like a scar. She laughed bitterly to herself. "Follow your heart," she whispered. "Guess I should have followed mine too." Her phone buzzed beside her, hundreds of messages flooding in, fans, old friends, strangers who somehow felt they knew her. "You were so real, Debbie. Team Debbie forever. He didn't deserve you, broken heart." She read each one slowly, tears welling in her eyes. The outpouring of love should have felt comforting, but instead it felt hollow, like everyone had fallen in love with a version of her that only existed on TV. The real Debbie, the one who cried in the shower between filming days, the one who doubted her worth every time another woman got a rose, that Debbie had disappeared behind the editing cuts and the catchy theme music. She picked up her phone again, this time opening her private gallery. There, buried among production photos and selfies, was one picture that made her breath hitch. It was Mel, smiling, holding her hand. It had been taken off camera, during a moment that was never meant for the world to see. They had been sitting by the fire pit after a long shoot, both exhausted but content. He had taken my hand without saying a word, tracing little circles with his thumb against my skin. "Do you ever get scared?" I asked him. "Every day," he said, "but When I'm with you, it feels easier. I believed him. Every word. The moment fans never saw. What the world didn't know, what the show didn't show, was the argument that followed just 2 days later. It had been cast midnight. Debbie had been pacing her room, mascara running, hair undone, voice breaking. Mel had come to talk, or maybe to end things before they ever really began. "Debbie, this isn't fair to anyone," he said, trying to stay calm. "Fair?" I shot back. "You tell me, you make things easier, and then you act like I don't exist the next day." The silence that followed was louder than any shouting could have been. Then he said something she would never forget. "Maybe I'm just not ready for the kind of love you deserve." And that, more than a rose, more than any goodbye ceremony, was the real heartbreak. Rose. Present day. The interview. When the Golden Hour podcast invited Debbie for a post-show tell-all, she hesitated. She wasn't sure she could relive it all on air. But something inside her, the part of her that refused to let her story be edited down to sound bites, said yes. Now, sitting across from the host under soft studio lights, she adjusted her microphone and smiled nervously. "So, Debbie, you've become one of the most beloved contestants in Golden Bachelor history. But tell us, what was it really like with Mel?" The question hit her chest like a weight. For a moment, she thought about giving the polished, media-friendly answer, but then she didn't. She said, "It was beautiful, and it was painful. I think that's what makes it real. You can love someone and still lose them, not because you did anything wrong, but because the timing was wrong, or maybe because the truth finally caught up." The host leaned in, and what truth was that? Debbie blinked back tears. That love on television might be lit with candles and filmed in slow motion, but off camera, it's messy, it's raw, and sometimes it breaks you before it heals you. Fans would later call it one of the most emotional Golden Bachelor interviews ever. Clips of her tear-streaked confession would go viral, captioned with, "Debbie's raw honesty is everything, broken heart." But in that moment, she wasn't thinking about the fans or Mel or the cameras. She was thinking about herself, the woman who had dared to love again.
The morning after
even
the
when it hurt.
podcast aired, Debbie's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages, tags, DMs, her name was everywhere. The clip of her teary confession had gone viral overnight, reaching millions. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all filled with comments like, "Debbie was the only real one on that show. Protect Debbie at all costs. Mel's going to regret letting her go." But viral love was a strange kind of comfort. It felt warm, but hollow. For every heart emoji, there was a reminder that her heartbreak had become content. For every message of support, there was a reminder that the world had watched her fall apart, one rose ceremony at a time. Debbie looked at herself in the mirror that morning. No makeup, puffy eyes, hair messy from sleep. The woman staring back at her wasn't the glamorous one in sequined gowns or slow-motion confessionals. She was older, softer, wiser, and maybe, just maybe, freer. She sighed, poured her coffee, and sat by the window. The sunlight spilled across her table, touching the yellow petals of a single rose in a vase, one she had kept from the show. It had dried now, brittle and faded, but she couldn't throw it away. It wasn't just a flower. It was a memory, a promise, a lesson. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Trina, one of the other women from the show. Trina. "Hey Deb, reunion's filming next week. You going?" Debbie. "I don't know. Not sure I can face him again." Trina. "You have to come. The fans want closure. And so do you." Closure. That word stung. Did closure really exist? Or was it just a nice way of saying, "We'll reopen the wound one more time, but with better lighting"? Still, she knew Trina was right. Part of her story was still unfinished. 1 week later, the reunion set. The set looked exactly like it had on TV. The glowing candles, the plush chairs, the soft golden lighting that made every tear shimmer beautifully for the camera. It was almost cruel. to recreate the scene of so much heartache and call it reunion. As she sat in the makeup chair, Debbie felt the familiar flutter in her chest. The producer, Jenna, leaned in with a sympathetic smile. "You ready for this?" Debbie managed a small nod. "As ready as I'll ever be." Jenna squeezed her hand. "Just be yourself. That's why everyone loves you." When the camera started rolling, the room filled with familiar faces. The women laughed, hugged, and shared behind-the-scenes stories for the audience. But Debbie could barely focus. Her heart pounded too loud. Because there he was, Mel. He looked almost the same, composed, charming, that steady warmth that drew people in like sunlight. But something in his eyes had changed. A heaviness. Regret, maybe, or recognition. The host turned to her. "Debbie, it's been months since you and Mel last saw each other. How does it feel being here tonight?" Her throat tightened. "Strange," she admitted. "I thought I'd moved on. But sitting here, it feels like coming back to a place that both hurt me and healed me." The audience went quiet. Mel finally spoke. His voice was low, careful. "Debbie, I've watched everything back. Every moment, every word. And I just want to say, I'm sorry." Her breath caught. "Sorry for what?" He said, "For not being braver. For being afraid to choose something real when I had the chance." The studio lights dimmed slightly, focusing on them. Two people who had lived an entire love story under public scrutiny, now forced to relive it again. Debbie shook her head, tears welling. "You don't have to apologize, Mel. I needed that heartbreak. It woke me up." "Woke you up to what?" She said quietly, "That love isn't supposed to make you feel small. It's supposed to make you feel seen, even when the cameras aren't rolling." The crowd gasped softly, a mix of awe and heartbreak. Even Mel looked stunned. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled sadly. "You always had a way with words." She gave a soft laugh, wiping a tear. "Guess I learned from the best." After the cameras. When filming wrapped, the cast gathered for champagne and small talk. Debbie stayed near the corner, trying to steady her breathing. She wasn't sure if she wanted to stay or slip away unnoticed. Then she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Debbie!" She turned. Mel stood there holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Peace offering?" he asked, his tone light but hesitant. She took one. "You still remember how I like it?" He chuckled. "Half bubbles, half patience. Yes, I remember." They clinked glasses softly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he sighed sadly. "I meant what I said tonight. You deserved more than I gave you." She studied him. "Maybe, but maybe we both got what we needed." He frowned slightly. "Which was?" She said simply, "Growth. You learned what fear costs. I learned what self-worth feels like." He nodded slowly. "Do you ever wonder if things would have been different off camera?" Her heart twisted. "All the time, but we'll never know, will we?" He reached for her hand, the same way he had that night by the fire pit. This time, she didn't pull away. "I'll always care for you, Debbie," he said softly, "even if we were just a chapter." She smiled through tears. "Then I'm glad we wrote it." They stood there for a moment, hand in hand, surrounded by the fading buzz of the set. Then she gently let go. And that quiet, graceful release was her real closure. Epilogue. The letter. A few weeks later, Debbie sat in her living room with a cup of tea, watching the sunset. Her life was quieter now. No cameras, no producers, just her dog, and the sound of wind through the trees. On the table beside her sat a letter, one she had written but never sent. "Dear Mel, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe you've already moved on. Maybe you're with someone who makes you laugh the way I once did. But I want to thank you for reminding me that love isn't always forever. Sometimes it's just a mirror that shows us who we're meant to become. I've cried more than I expected. I've healed slower than I hoped. But through it all, I've found myself again. Maybe that's the truth behind the roses. They bloom beautifully, but only for a season. With love, Debbie." She sealed the letter, then tucked it into her journal instead of mailing it. Some truths didn't need to be shared. They only needed to be accepted. As the sun sunk below the horizon, Debbie smiled faintly. The world might remember her for her heartbreak, but she would remember herself for her courage, because she hadn't just survived the Golden Bachelor.
The
She
days
had
after the
outgrown
reunion
it.
were quiet. Too quiet. For months, Debbie had lived surrounded by producers, cameras, and constant chatter. Now, the silence in her house felt both peaceful and hollow, like the world had finally taken a breath and forgotten her name. Her mornings began with coffee and long walks by the lake near her home in Colorado. She'd stop at the same wooden bench each morning, the one overlooking the water, and let the cold air sting her cheeks awake. The first week, she kept expecting her phone to buzz with another production email or social media frenzy. But slowly, the notifications faded. The hashtags stopped trending. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Debbie was just Debbie again. She thought she'd feel lonely without the noise. Instead, she felt free. Healing in silence. One morning, she brought a notebook to the lake. She hadn't planned to write anything, but her pen moved almost on its own. They don't show you this part on TV, the part where you sit in silence, learning how to breathe again without an audience. Each day she filled another page. Memories, confessions, half poems that only made sense to her. It wasn't therapy, it was release. She started volunteering at a local community center for widowed and divorced women. They held weekly gatherings, coffee, laughter, sometimes tears, and Debbie found herself speaking more and more, sharing bits of her experience. One woman, a gentle soul named Marlene, squeezed her hand one afternoon. "You gave us courage, Debbie. Watching you love again after everything, it gave us hope." She smiled, tears stinging her eyes. "Funny, I thought I'd lost mine." A new opportunity. Months passed. The Golden Bachelor hype dimmed as new seasons and new heartbreaks filled the airwaves. But one afternoon, Debbie's phone rang again. An unfamiliar number with a Los Angeles area code. "Hi, Debbie. This is Sophie from Good Morning America. We loved your podcast interview and your story. Would you be open to coming on the show to talk about finding strength after heartbreak?" Debbie hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no. The other part, the one that had grown brave through pain, whispered yes. A week later, she sat in a bright New York studio, her heart pounding behind her blazer. The host smiled warmly. "So, Debbie, millions watched your journey. You've become a symbol of resilience and grace. What's next for you?" Debbie smiled softly. "What's next? Maybe peace. Maybe learning to love myself the way I once tried to love someone else." The audience applauded gently, not the explosive reality TV kind of applause, but the quiet, heartfelt one that meant they felt her words. After the segment ended, as she stood backstage, a voice came from behind her. That was beautiful. She turned and met kind brown eyes behind a pair of glasses. The man was tall, maybe mid-60s, with a salt and pepper beard and a gentle smile. "I'm sorry," she said. "Do I know you?" He chuckled. "Probably not. I'm David. I'm one of the writers for the show. I've been following your story. My daughter made me watch The Golden Bachelor." She laughed. "Ah, so you were forced into it." "Completely," he grinned. "But I'm glad she did. You were authentic. Rare." There was a pause, that soft, charged kind of pause that felt both old and new. "Well," she said, smiling. "Thank you. That means more than you know." An expected spark. They ended up having coffee that afternoon, just two people sharing stories, laughter, and a quiet understanding of life after heartbreak. David was a widower. His wife had passed away 5 years earlier, and he'd spent most of that time writing, working, and trying not to feel too much. With Debbie, he found himself smiling easily again. They talked about everything: grief, love, loss, and how strange it felt to have your heart wake up after years of sleep. When they finally parted ways, he said, "You know, there's a cafe near the park that has the best blueberry muffins. Maybe we can test that theory sometime." Debbie smiled. "I'll hold you to it." Relearning joy. Weeks turned into months. The more they talked, the easier it felt. There were no cameras this time, no producers, no lines to rehearse, Just two people rebuilding trust in something gentle, something real. One evening, as they walked through the park, David stopped and said, "You ever think about what you'd say to Mel if you saw him again?" Debbie laughed softly. "Honestly, I think I already said everything I needed to." "And if he asked whether you're happy?" She looked up at the fading sky, the orange glow reflecting in her eyes. "I'd say yes, but not because of someone else, because I finally am enough for myself." David smiled. "That's beautiful." She nudged him playfully. "Maybe I've spent too long around cameras. Everything I say sounds like it needs theme music." They both laughed, the kind of laughter that healed old wounds. Meanwhile, fans are still shook. Online, Debbie's story had quietly evolved into something bigger. Fans followed her blog, The Truth Behind the Roses, where she wrote about healing, second chances, and the lessons love teaches us when it leaves. Her posts went viral again, not because they were dramatic, but because they were honest. One post read, "I thought my story ended when Mel didn't choose me. Turns out that was just the plot twist I needed." Soon, she began getting invitations to speak at events, to host a podcast, to write a book. She said yes to most of them, not for fame, but for connection. In every speech, she said the same thing. The truth is, love stories don't always end with roses. Sometimes they end with reflection, and that's still beautiful. A quiet ending. One spring evening, exactly a year after her Golden Bachelor journey ended, Debbie and David sat by the same lake where she used to write in silence. The air smelled of lilacs, and the world felt soft again. "Do you ever miss it?" David asked. "The show, the cameras, the spotlight?" Debbie smiled wistfully. "Sometimes, but I miss the idea of it more than the reality. What I loved wasn't the fame. It was the reminder that love can find you no matter how old or broken you think you are." He reached for her hand, and she let him hold it. No hesitation this time. The lake shimmered before them, reflecting two silhouettes that had finally found peace. "Funny thing," she said. "The fans always said they wanted a happy ending." "And do you think you got one?" he asked. She thought for a moment, eyes glistening. "Not the one I expected, but the one I needed." They sat there in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Not a grand finale, but a soft fade-out. A quiet, graceful ending for a woman who once believed her love story had ended in heartbreak.